Mary, just sit quietly and take notes. Let the real negotiators handle this, Trevor Hamilton said, eyes glued to his stack of papers. The room went still, the low hum of the air conditioner suddenly deafening. I tightened my grip on my pen, that familiar sting of being sidelined hitting me square in the chest. This was supposed to be my deal: months of work, endless calls, and late nights, all leading to this meeting at Brightburn Studios in Portland. Instead, here I was, pushed into secretary mode while Trevor and his boys' club prepared to take the credit. Again. I'm Mary Lowe, 34 years old, senior business development manager for 6 years, and the reason this company is still thriving in a volatile market. Every major international partnership in the last few years. That was me, but the second we reached the final table, I'd get edged out so Trevor could swoop in for the victory lap. Today, though, I had an ace they didn't know about. Our guest was Zhang Wei, founder of Golden Phoenix Entertainment, one of Asia's largest media empires, worth over $2 billion. This partnership could triple our revenue in 2 years. And I was the only one in this building who knew how to land it. I'd spent 8 months building trust with him, learning his business philosophy, understanding his family traditions, even paying for my own Mandarin lessons. Trevor and his team didn't know any of that. Trevor, I should mention that Mr. Zhang prefers, I began, but he cut me off with a lazy flick of his hand. Mary, please, we've got this handled. Just take good notes for the report. The smirk he threw me made my stomach twist. Brad Kimmel and Jason Torres flanked him, both wearing matching smug expressions in their tailored suits. They thought they were about to make history. They weren't. Half an hour earlier, Zhang Wei's assistant had texted me he'd be arriving early, and he wanted to speak with the woman who understood his vision. My colleagues assumed it was a translation slip. I knew better. They were standing on what they thought was bedrock. In reality, it was quicksand, and I was about to let them sink. This moment had been 3 years in the making. When I first started on international partnerships, I noticed how often we sent culturally tone-deaf negotiators abroad. It was a disaster waiting to happen. Meeting Zhang at a trade conference in Los Angeles confirmed it. Our leadership didn't just miss opportunities, they didn't even recognize them. I grew up in a working-class family in Sacramento, where my parents, both teachers, taught me that talent alone wasn't enough. Success took strategy, patience, and spotting chances others overlooked. They sacrificed to put me through business school, and I swore I'd make it count. At first, Brightburn Studios looked like the perfect place: progressive, creative, making films that tackled social issues. But behind closed doors, the executive team was an old boys' network with a thin coat of modern paint. My MBA from Stanford and my track record meant nothing compared to Trevor's good all-boy handshake deals and outdated charm. He'd been my biggest obstacle, charismatic enough to impress the board, clueless when it came to global business. The moment I brought Zhang's company to the table, he grabbed the credit and declared himself lead negotiator. Brad was his loyal echo, Jason slightly sharper but just as dismissive. Together, they formed a wall of mediocrity that had kept me from advancing for years. Today, that wall was about to crack. What Trevor and his crew didn't know was that Zhang Wei had sought me out after our very first meeting. He wasn't just impressed by my business skills, he valued my genuine effort to understand Chinese business culture. Over the past 8 months, we'd traded dozens of emails, discussing everything from shifting market trends to the writings of Confucius. When I mentioned my Mandarin studies, he didn't just encourage me, he personally recommended books that would help me grasp the subtleties of formal business language. The irony was delicious. While Trevor and his team were polishing up their usual high-pressure, American-style pitch, Zhang Wei was expecting a measured, culturally attuned conversation about long-term vision. They were marching straight into a cultural minefield, and I was the only one holding the map. 2 weeks before the meeting, during our quarterly review, my resolve solidified. I had just presented the preliminary terms I'd negotiated with Golden Phoenix Entertainment, easily the most lucrative deal in the company's history, a 3-year exclusive distribution agreement, $15 million in guaranteed advances. and profit-sharing terms that could bring in another $20 million annually. The room was silent, the kind of silence that comes before applause. Then Patrick Westbrook, our CEO, smiled and said, "Excellent work, Trevor. This is exactly the kind of strategic thinking we need more of." He didn't even glance at me. I felt my face burn. "Actually, Patrick, I was the one who..." "Mary's been a great support," Trevor cut in smoothly, "really solid note-taking and research assistance. That warning look he shot me, it said stay in your lane." That night, I sat in my apartment staring at the contract I had built clause by clause, weaving in my knowledge of Chinese law, etiquette, and guanxi, the intricate web of trust and obligation that makes or breaks business in China. Jiang Wei had praised my understanding of it. Trevor wouldn't even be able to define it. That's when I made my decision. I called Jiang Wei's assistant and arranged a private meeting to prepare for the negotiation. The video call was conducted entirely in Mandarin. We spoke frankly about the pitfalls of cross-cultural deals and his frustration with American executives who treated Chinese customs as an afterthought. Then, in perfect English, he said, "Mary, you understand that business is about more than contracts. It is about trust, respect, and shared vision. I hope your colleagues share this understanding." I smiled and assured him they did, even as I knew they didn't. From that moment, the seed was planted. If they insisted on treating me as invisible, I'd let them see what happened when that invisibility worked against them. They had underestimated me for years, dismissing my work as support. But in today's global market, relationships beat ego every time. Cultural fluency beat old boy networking without even breaking a sweat. As I watched Trevor, Brad, and Jason rehearse their victory lap, I kept my expression neutral. Inside, I was already counting down to the moment they would learn just how costly disrespect could be. I smiled politely. "I appreciate your enthusiasm, gentlemen, but I think there's been a misunderstanding about the kind of partnership I've been discussing with your company." Trevor's confident expression flickered just for a moment. "Our terms are pretty straightforward, Mr. Jiang," he said. "This is a very generous deal for your company." The air in the room seemed to cool. Jiang Wei's assistants exchanged subtle glances. We were at the edge of a cliff, and I knew the next step would decide everything. Jiang's voice was calm, but there was steel in it. "Mr. Hamilton, I believe there's been serious miscommunication about both the scope and philosophy of this partnership. My focus has been cultural exchange, mutual respect, and sustainable growth. What you're proposing sounds more like a colonial extraction model." Trevor flushed but kept going, buoyed by the overconfidence that had carried him through his career. "Colonial? Come on, Mr. Jiang, this is good business. We both make money, everybody wins. Sometimes you have to move fast. Move fast and break things, as you Americans say," Jiang replied, pointedly misquoting Silicon Valley's favorite slogan. Brad, oblivious, laughed. "Exactly, that's the entrepreneurial spirit. We're disruptors." Jason, sensing trouble but not knowing why, jumped in. "Mr. Jiang, maybe we can walk through the financial models. Once you see the projected returns, I think you'll understand why this is a win-win." Jiang regarded him with the patience of a teacher explaining something to a stubborn student. "Mr. Torres, profitability is not my main concern. Golden Phoenix Entertainment is already profitable. I want content that bridges cultures and tells authentic stories. That requires partners who share our values, not those who view Chinese audiences as a market to exploit." Silence. The three men glanced at each other, clearly lost. They'd come prepared to sell a product, not discuss philosophy. Trevor cleared his throat. "Of course, cultural understanding is important to us too. That's why we brought Mary. She's been researching cultural aspects." Every head turned toward me. Jiang's eyes lit with his first genuine interest since entering the room. "Mary has been thorough," Trevor continued, clearly hoping I'd salvage this disaster. "She can address your concerns." I felt the familiar surge of irritation, volunteered to fix a mess they'd created, but also anticipation. This was the moment I'd been waiting for. Zhang leaned forward. Miss Low, I would be very interested to hear your perspective on how our companies might work together in a way that honors both cultures. Trevor nodded as if passing me the ball, still assuming I'd rescue him. Brad and Jason looked relieved. They had no idea they'd just given me the perfect opportunity to dismantle their entire pitch. I closed my notebook and set down my pen. The simple act drew every eye in the room. Mr. Zhang, I began evenly. The disconnect here comes from fundamentally different mindsets. Trevor and his team are approaching this transactionally, as a trade of content for money. Trevor smiled. Exactly, Mary. Cultural differences can make simple deals look more complicated than they are. I allowed myself a small, private satisfaction. Actually, Trevor, that approach is exactly wrong for this partnership. The room went still. Trevor's smile faltered. Turning to Zhang, I switched to flawless Mandarin. Respected sir, I think we need to restart this discussion. My colleagues do not understand the complexities involved in building a true partnership. The transformation was instant. Zhang's formal politeness melted into genuine engagement. His assistants straightened, surprised and pleased. Trevor's jaw dropped. Mary, since when do you speak Chinese? I ignored him, continuing in Mandarin. I have studied your company's goals in depth. I believe we can create something built on respect and long-term vision. Zhang's eyes warmed. Miss Low, this is exactly the dialogue I've been hoping for. Your grasp of cultural bridge building is impressive. We spoke on, the energy in the room shifting entirely. Trevor, Brad, and Jason looked increasingly unsettled. They couldn't follow the words, but Zhang's animated tone told them enough. Finally, Trevor broke in, his voice tight. Mary, could you translate? We need to stay involved. I met Trevor's gaze with the same cool dismissal he'd shown me for 3 years. Actually, Trevor, Mr. Zhang and I are discussing whether this partnership can move forward at all, given the fundamental misalignment he's seen between his values and your team's approach. Zhang nodded gravely and switched to English for the others. Miss Low has summarized my concerns perfectly. This partnership demands an understanding that success is measured not only in immediate profits, but in the lasting value created through respectful collaboration. I knew the moment had come. Calmly, I rose from my chair. Mr. Zhang, perhaps we should structure this differently. My independent consulting rate is 15% of the deal value. Shall we proceed without them? The words detonated in the room. Trevor's expression froze, then cracked as the meaning sank in. Yes, Zhang said without hesitation. That would be my preferred arrangement. You understand both the scope and the spirit of what I wish to achieve. The silence was suffocating. Trevor's face cycled from confusion to shock to horror. Brad looked physically slapped. Jason rifled through his notes, as if a missing clause might undo what had just happened. Wait, Mary, you can't just, this is Britt Fern's deal, you work for us, this is corporate theft. Trevor's voice cracked. I packed my notebook with deliberate precision. Actually, Trevor, I built this relationship on my own time, with my own resources, and conducted every substantive negotiation myself. I've documented everything meticulously for the past 8 months. I set a thick folder on the table. Every email, every cultural briefing, every connection was between Golden Phoenix Entertainment and Mary Low Consulting. Zhang's assistant was already taking notes on a tablet. Miss Low, shall we arrange a follow-up meeting to finalize terms? Absolutely, I said, switching between Mandarin and English so Trevor couldn't miss a word. We can have a formal agreement drafted within 2 weeks. Trevor shot to his feet. Crimson, this is unethical. You can't take our client and start your own firm. Your client? I raised an eyebrow. You've spent this entire meeting proving you don't understand Mr. Zhang's business model, values, or culture. You've insulted him, ignored his priorities, and reduced his vision to a cash grab. Tell me, what part of that qualifies as a successful client relationship? Zhang stood, extending his hand to me in a gesture of formal respect, nothing like the perfunctory handshake he'd given Trevor. Miss Low, It has been a pleasure working with someone who truly understands cultural partnership. I look forward to our continued collaboration. As his team gathered their materials, I faced my former colleagues, the same 3 men who had taken credit for my work, sidelined me, and underestimated me now looked hollowed out. Brad's voice was barely audible. "How long have you been planning this?" "I wasn't planning anything," I said truthfully. "I was just doing my job well, which, apparently, was so foreign to you that you never saw it coming. Every time you pushed me aside, you taught Mr. Zhang to see me as the professional, and you as the obstacles." Jason finally blurted, "The company will sue you into bankruptcy. You can't just steal a $15 million deal." I smiled, genuinely. "This time, Jason, there's no deal to steal. You destroyed any chance of a partnership with Zhang Wei an hour ago. I'm just salvaging the value from the wreckage you created." At the door, Zhang paused to address them in English. "Gentlemen, Miss Lowe did not steal this opportunity. You gave it to her through your own conduct. In Chinese business culture, we have a saying, the superior man is modest in his speech, but exceeds in his actions. Today, you have shown the opposite." He walked out. I followed, leaving them alone with their glossy presentation materials and the knowledge that their careers at Brit Studios were already over. Within 3 months, the company's international division collapsed. Trevor Hamilton was demoted to a lower-paying regional sales role, reporting to a woman 15 years his junior. Brad Kimmel was fired after alienating 3 more international partners. Jason Torres survived, barely, after a steep pay cut and mandatory cultural sensitivity training. Even the CEO, Patrick Westbrook, was forced to explain to the board how he'd lost a transformative partnership through what trade publications called breathtaking cultural incompetence. The Golden Phoenix deal became a case study in business schools, how arrogance and ignorance can kill opportunity. From my new office overlooking the Willamette River, reviewing proposals from 3 major Asian conglomerates inspired by my success with Zhang Wei, I thought back to that conference room. My revenge had never been about anger. It was about refusing to let people who couldn't see my value define it. And sometimes, the sweetest victory isn't in destroying your enemies, it's in succeeding so completely that they destroy themselves.